Hello everyone, Lore Master of Sotek here, back with another episode of the Chaos Dwarfs Q&A. Just a reminder that this episode will be continuing in the technology section, so if there are any episodes you missed, be sure to go back earlier in the playlist and check those out. So without further ado, let's get started. Today's first question: do Chaos Dwarfs have a naval or airborne force of any kind? So do they have any kind of navy, yada yada, and also where does it go if it does exist? So, the Chaos Dwarfs do not have an organized air force, not that we're aware of, but they do have some truly terrifying flying monsters that are more than capable of slaying dragons and other massive beasts. Most notable is the Bale Taurus and Lamassu, though it's not unusual for them to acquire the allegiance of one of the frightening magma dragons that can be found in that part of the world. As for a navy, they do actually have one. The Chaos Dwarfs make good use of their devastating war machines and are masters of steam and demonic power technology. While there aren't any major details on their naval vessels, where they go is well documented enough. The River Ruin flows from the Falls of Doom on Zorn-Uzkul through Mingolzar Nagrund itself and continues south along the eastern border of the Darklands, gathering tributaries from the Mountains of Morn until it finally reaches the Cursed Coast and into the Sea of Dread. They also created their own route to the north by digging a canal using colossal machines and countless slaves to connect the Sea of Chaos through a port in Uzkulak down to the Falls of Doom. Then they created a complex system that allows their ships to ascend to the upper plateau of Zorn-Uzkul when going north, so the fleet of the Chaos Dwarfs can leave to the north through the Sea of Chaos or the south through the Sea of Dread as it wishes. For those curious, we actually have notes that the Chaos Dwarf Navy was created around the Imperial year of 1000, so 1000 years after the formation of the Empire, which the Northern Canal was dug very soon afterwards. The main purpose of the Chaos Dwarf Navy is simply to go out looking for large groups of slaves from across the world to capture, and also to bombard and capture any unfortunates that stumble across them. It's likely a fairly small fleet of ships, but possesses just terrifying firepower. I doubt there are many navies in the world that could go up against the Chaos Dwarfs, seeing as you probably wouldn't know they were coming very easily, unless you just happen to notice, large plumes of steam and smoke on the horizon from all of their engines and such. But to suddenly come across them, they would almost certainly beat virtually anyone in a fight, maybe save for the legendary Black Arcs of the Dark Elves and a properly equipped High Elf fleet. Next up, what is the armor of the Chaos Dwarfs made of? How does it compare to other forms of armor? And we kind of have a special note here that were the red scales of the Chaos Dwarf armor a specific metal, or just part of that time period when it came to Games Workshop's painting. The classic armor of the Chaos Dwarfs is forged mainly from iron and brass, typically a type of scale-like armor that has interlocking plates reinforced by runic symbols and the sorceries of Hashut. This is the red scale armor some of you mentioned, given that hue by the brass components used. It tends to depend on the sorcerer prophet being discussed, as each member of Hashut's priesthood is responsible for gearing out their own legions, and soldiers in whatever weapons and armor they prefer. However, while there are often unique stylistic designs, the armor of the Drathzar is easily equivalent to the steel plate and other heavy armors found in the old world due to the way they treat it. There is one particular style of armor that is their most formidable, and rivals the famous Gromril utilized by the dwarfs of the World's Edge Mountains. That is the Hell-forged plate known as Black Shard armor. This impressive creation bears many similarities to the chaos armor the Dawizar often barter to the Northmen, but is even mightier, as it has been blessed by the priests of Hashut to be incredibly resistant to all forms of fire and heat. The likes of Dragon Breath will wash over the elite of the Chaos Dwarf infantry without so much as singeing their curled beards when they're garbed in Blackshard. The units you'd see running around in Blackshard armor would be the Infernal Guard and Infernal Ironsworn, along with any other elite soldiers found in Mingolzar Nagrund or the Tower of Gorgoth. As to what exactly comprises Blackshard armor, it seems to be mostly made of iron that has been put through an extremely rigorous process of forging that infuses it with blood, souls, and the horrific raw power of chaos sorcery and Hashut's blessings. Let's see here. How did Chaos Siege Giants come about? Do we know who made them first? There is no credited individual among the Chaos Dwarfs for the creation of the Chaos Siege Giants, but they have been utilized by the Dawizar for quite some time. It didn't take much in the way of imagination for the cruel masters of Mingolzar Nagrund to see the potential in the many giants they faced off against when contesting the Greenskins and Ogre tribes that have always been a nuisance in the Darklands. The thing about the giants that makes them excel at being experimented upon is that the big brutes are so damn hardy and strong that they can suffer through the improvements made to them by the demon smiths, and just become all the more devastating in battle. However, don't be fooled into thinking that there's many of them. Even the impressive constitution of giants struggles under the attentions of the Dawizar, and it's pretty rare for a giant to survive their ministrations. Thanks to trade with the Greenskins, Ogre Kingdoms, and Warriors of Chaos, however, they've found many factions willing to pawn off giants they've managed to capture or lure into their hordes, though, so the Chaos Dwarfs tend to have plenty of stock to tamper with from time to time. This next one was asked by many people, and we combined it together to basically be, what can be said about the Chaos Dwarf Siege Weapons? So we're going to be focusing on little questions such as, what's the deadliest one, or what's the most cruel or vile design, what sort of beasts, weapons, demons, and stuff are used for all their siege weapons, and all that stuff. So, let's get into it. We have spoken at length about Chaos Dwarf Siege Weapons in a broad sense, so for this question, I'm going to focus on answering a few specific questions and kind of hyper-focusing, let's say, on a few specific machines. The deadliest siege machine created by the Chaos Dwarfs that we've seen used is undoubtedly the Dreadquake Mortar. These things are colossal. The shells alone are of such staggering size that an ogre is required to reload the mortar if there's any hope of firing it at a reasonable pace. The machine is so immense because it utilizes a system of steam to fire the shells, a great boiler taking up much of the engine, along with many gears that rotate the mortar into the proper direction for firing. The reason steam is required is that the Dreadquake shells are not mundane munitions, but terrifying and unstable creations of sorcery and science that cannot be allowed near open flame or black powder without just going off. Once fired, the shells will burst into a roaring blood-red light that will explode upon contact with something, shattering buildings with ease and smashing the ground apart like a hammer blow from an angry god. The impact site will bleed with an eerie crimson energy among the devastation. To be struck by the impact of a Dreadquake mortar is pretty much instant death for just about everything, and the explosion is of such horrific size and strength that it can easily tear through the heaviest of armor, even at the edges of the impact. Most heavily armored knights would be shredded to pieces in an instant. There's just no protection besides monstrous vitality. However, that's even before the final aspect of the siege weapon is taken into account, which grants it the name of Dreadquake. For such is the weight and energy unleashed by the shells that it causes a localized earthquake around the impact site, hurling organized regiments into chaos and leaving them unable to move as they're thrown to the ground by the ground vibrating beneath them, leaving them vulnerable to just being picked off by further siege weapons and Chaos Dwarf firing. When it comes to the most vile and cruel machine, that would have to be the Hell Cannon, as that demonic monstrosity is one of the most unstable and terrifying weapons utilized on any battlefield in the Warhammer Fantasy world. The demon-machine hybrids don't actually fire any kind of munition or shell, but instead have the corpses of the slain shoveled into the hellish fires within through a vent on the machine's side. Here, the flesh, muscle, and bone will run away like wax as it's melted away, leaving the burning souls of those fed to the Hell Cannon. The demon, contained within the engine, will unleash its fury upon these unfortunates, shredding their shrieking essences and forcefully transmuting them into roiling balls of chaotic energy, which is then spat out of the Hell Cannon's mouth as a blast of utter destruction. This is why the shots of the Hell Cannon can twist and turn in the air to seek out their targets, the agonized souls of those sacrificed to the war machines having been turned into a sentient missile that eagerly seeks to bring fiery oblivion to those it has been aimed at. Even worse, the nasty thing about Hell Cannons is that they're often imbued with the mightiest demons the demon smiths can get their cruel hands on. Thus, the monstrosities are only barely contained by their runes and chains. These siege weapons are constantly straining to break free and are actually capable of animating themselves to snap free from their chains and charge forward, pulverizing the enemy under their iron wheels and even devouring the foe with those fanged muzzles to fuel their endless hunger for sowing death and destruction. As for specific demons, beasts, and smaller weapons, we'll talk more about those later on in a specific section kind of geared just for them. Up next, how does Chaos Dwarf culture differ from the regular dwarves when it comes to just pure technology? Are they as traditional? And does anything prevent progress for them? So, are they different? Oh yes, very much so. The Chaos Dwarfs do not care for the traditional outlook that their Western cousins have, as they care only for furthering the will of Hashut, and Hashut wills for domination and destruction. Over the millennia, he has shared much hellish lore with them, and the Chaos Dwarves are ever eager to further their own designs to sow as much destruction and death as possible. As we spoke about earlier, they're not reckless about it like the Skaven, and still place extreme value on reliability and quality in their craft, but that is the only thing that slows their march of constant innovation. What is known about the Chaos Dwarfs' technologies to artificially create newborns? Why don't they use this tech to greatly increase their legions? I think this question is a slight misunderstanding. The Chaos Dwarfs have not discovered a way to artificially create newborns. However, they have been heavily delving into using their blood magic and technology to augment newborn Chaos Dwarfs into bull centaurs. This is because the bull centaurs are immensely important to the culture of the Dawizar, operating as the guardians of the Temple of Hashut and fulfilling many crucial roles both in society and on the battlefields. However, they're an extremely rare mutation, and the sorcerer prophets realized that they were coming to a point where they needed more bull centaurs than were being produced. So, the crafty bastards decided to start experimenting on babies, and found quite a bit of success. The main method is some horrific mixture of using Hashut sorcery to graft demon flesh around mechanical implantations surgically added to the baby's body to make them essentially into bull centaurs, and they will grow to be pretty much the same thing. You know, just absolutely delightful stuff. Here's a very popular question. Do the Chaos Dwarfs share any technology with the dwarfs of the old world? For example, Rune Magic, Gromril smithing, etc. Yes, quite a bit actually. The Chaos Dwarfs don't care and have zero issues with bastardizing all of the lore and technology they possessed back in the good old days when they were regular dwarfs. In fact, one could accurately say that much of their power is derived more from twisting and corrupting the methods of the Dawi as opposed to creating truly unique forms of technology. Rune Magic in particular is still an immense part of Dawi Zar creation and engineering, much to the horror and anger of the dwarfs. You know, it's not just because they're very distantly related that the Dawi so deeply despise the Chaos Dwarfs. They've literally corrupted and perverted everything that the Dawi hold sacred and, you know, have learned and revere. Honestly, it would be much easier for me to point out the things not shared by the two empires when it comes to technology, which is actually the following. The Chaos Dwarfs utilize the binding of demons. They don't allow themselves to be held back by tradition, and have quite the obsession with using their sorcery to tinker with the very fabric of life. The dwarfs of the Karaz Ankor, however, have developed an interesting focus on flight with their gyrocopters and zeppelins and thunder barges, which the Dawi Zar lack, as they instead turn to monsters when seeking to contest the skies. The dwarfs also have the most pure form of technology that virtually never misfires or fails to perform, not to mention they have a much safer work environment, thanks to the lack of having demons damn near everywhere in the process, and leaving the naturally unreliable power of magic out of the equation. Next question. What is a Hellforge, and how/what is its function? A Hellforge is simply the name for the forges of the Chaos Dwarfs. It's not a particularly unique or rare thing within the Empire of the Thrath Zar. In fact, I would argue that there's probably one in virtually every single Chaos Dwarf settlement, or outpost, or tower, or what have you. How does Chaos Dwarf technology compare to the other technologically advanced races such as the Skaven, Dwarfs, etc., including forging weapons, armor, siege weapons, and everything else under that umbrella? Hoo boy. Okay, so for this question, we'll focus more on the aspect of weapons, armor, and other gear, as we have already heavily addressed siege weapons and overall tech between the various tech-heavy races. Overall, when it comes to armor, the Chaos Dwarfs are only rivaled by their ancestral kin, the Dawi. Gromril is utilized by both races, but while the Dawi reinforce their armor with passed down knowledge of smithing and pure runes, the Chaos Dwarfs instead rely more upon blood magic and demon smithing. This leads to an interesting parallel in that both are incredibly powerful and resistant to nearly all forms of damage, but the dwarfs of the Karaz Ankor tend to create pieces that are purely focused on defense in all its forms, whereas the Dawi Zar will create armor that is tough but also specializes in lashing out and harming would-be attackers, as well as a resistant to flame. Though, in recent years, the Dawi of the Karaz Ankor have also been looking into fire resistance, which caused the creation of the special Gromril suits that the Iron Drakes wear. In any event, The thing I would say is that when it comes to their mightiest god tier creations, the Chaos Dwarfs, while they would never admit it, would actually find themselves outmatched by the Dawi. Try as they might to claim that Hashut is the ultimate power in the world, in truth, their craft is a corruption of the true craft, passed down from the ancestor gods. While Hashut's sorceries do in fact make such creations far better at unleashing just wanton devastation and suffering, nothing created by the Thrathzar could match the ultimate god-crafted creations of the ancestor gods themselves, such as the Throne of Power, the Axes of Grimnir, etc. As for the Ratmen, the amount of creations they have unleashed upon the world that can rival the might of the Chaos Dwarfs are few and far between. Using Warpstone as a fuel source for almost everything, the designs of the Skaven have the potential to outclass their infernal rivals, but whether they'd actually do it seems incredibly unlikely. The only advantage that Clan Skryre can reliably call upon is that they can mass-produce all forms of tech in a way that the Chaos Dwarfs can only dream of. However, the Dawi Czar's every creation is more than equal to the task of facing off against Clan Skryre despite the numbers disadvantage, as that is something the Chaos Dwarfs have to deal with on the regular. In the end, I would say that on the average battlefield, the Chaos Dwarfs are the true undisputed masters of warfare in all forms of technology. They will come out on top the most often, only running into serious issues when faced with very specific counters. The Skaven could certainly cause problems when unleashing millions upon millions of guns, machines, and monsters against the plane of Zar, while the Dwarfs could claim victory if they're fortunate enough to have a handful of the exceedingly rare artifacts of the ancestor gods upon the battlefield. But those are likely to be rare instances, so just due to how difficult it is for those types of events to occur or for those kinds of weapons to be seen on the battlefield. So I'd say in most cases when you're looking for how they compare when it comes to warfare, the Chaos Dwarfs truly are on top from a technological perspective. Do Chaos Dwarfs use Warpstone at all? Yes, but only in extremely rare scenarios, and even then only in small quantities. It's just far too unreliable of a power source or ingredient to be utilized in most situations. That being said, there may be times where a sorcerer prophet or a demon smith is looking for just a really, really specific effect that Warpstone is just the only reliable material they can find or think of that fulfills that particular function, in which case they would use it. Do Hell Cannons or other demon weaponry ever turn against the Chaos Dwarfs, or the tormented souls that are used in their creations? Oh boy, do they! The most common way for a Chaos Dwarf to be brutally murdered is actually by far their own creations. Hell Cannons in particular are chained up and staked to the ground purely to prevent them from lashing out at everyone standing nearby, most notably their crews. Demons despise being contained or imprisoned in any fashion, and should there be a single crack or moment they can exploit, they'll do their damnedest to make sure that they use it, killing whoever put them there in the first place. However, there is a process in demon smithing we should talk about known as creating a hellbound siege weapon. This refers to drenching the siege weapon in demonic essence, by which I mean making sure that literally every bolt and frame are covered in hellish runes and contain raging demons. We're talking multiple demons to empower the device. The good news is, this ensures everything the weapon fires is roiling with chaotic energy, which functionally makes them magical munitions, in addition to the weapon itself being much sturdier and resistant to mundane damage. The downside is that the damn thing is practically vibrating with barely contained violence, and should anything go wrong, like a misfire, the crew is pretty much doomed to be torn apart or devoured, as their charge breaks apart and all the demons rush free. This process can only be used on siege weapons, but pretty much any of them. Death Shrieker rocket batteries, Dreadquake mortars, magma cannons, iron demons, you name it. Long story short though, is making a weapon hellbound essentially results in it being like a minor or lesser hell cannon, both in risk and reward. Have any notable or famous demons been bound by the demon smithing of the Chaos Dwarfs? Not that the Chaos Dwarfs have taken credit for in a written record. I do have my suspicions that the Slayer of Kings, which supposedly was created by Vandal, the second ever chosen of Chaos, may have had some notable assistance from the Dawizar to imprison the bloodthirster Uzul within. Not to be confused with Skulltaker, a special herald of Khorne who is also known as Uzul. But I do believe that the Slayer of Kings is a Chaos Dwarf weapon, or they were at least dramatically involved in its forging, which would actually add to the interesting parallel that we saw in the end times when it clashed against Galmaraz, which was wielded by forged by one of the ancestor gods. So you kind of got a showdown of the classic dwarf runesmithing versus the mightiest runesmithing of the Chaos Dwarfs, and the ancestor god Galmaraz, forged by the ancestor god, was the one that did come out on top in the end. What all creatures / species have the Chaos Dwarfs created that proved to be successful? Any that did not? The Chaos Dwarfs have only created 2 species that we're aware of, both of which could be considered successful depending on how you define it. The Black Orcs were a stable and promising creation. They were just made a little too well, if anything. The second, however, are the Kadai, which are a huge success as horrifying creatures of war, but come with a large caveat. They're incredibly difficult to create, and due to their unstable nature, because they burn so hot, they are essentially ticking time bombs that will literally burn through their own runes and iron bodies until they fall apart into a molten mess. So it's impossible for them to turn against their masters, but they also cannot reproduce in any way and have to be made to order. We'll speak more about them in a section rather specifically revolving around them. And then today's second to last question, I think, actually. Why did the Chaos Dwarfs abandon older but reliable technology like crossbows, handguns, and traditional cannons? Well, that's simply because their technology, what the Chaos Dwarfs have, is extremely reliable itself. It's just far more devastating. The Chaos Dwarfs' war machines are pretty stable on average. It's just that if something does go wrong, the resulting misfire is much bigger and more explosive than the old classic weapons. That being said, the Chaos Dwarfs are noted to still occasionally utilize older designs like cannons and such from time to time. But frankly, their stuff is just better on average. They're just, it may come with like a small caveat, but yeah. And then today's last question, what is the most powerful artifact ever created by the Chaos Dwarfs? Whew, okay. That's a really tricky question to answer. The main issue with it is that the Chaos Dwarfs had forged most of the items utilized by the Warriors of Chaos, and whether the greatest creation of theirs remains in their own hands, in the Chaos Dwarfs' hands, is impossible to say. Granted, the Chaos Dwarfs are specifically noted in their lore for refusing to share their biggest and baddest toys. So the odds are they still possess it. In any event, let's take a look. The deadliest weapon that has been seen in the hands of a Dawizar is known as the Dark Mace. This ancient weapon has been lurking among the Empire of the Chaos Dwarfs for so long that its true origins are shrouded in myth, but based on its properties, it likely was one of the mightiest creations forged beneath the infernal glare of Hashut, or perhaps it's even a gift from the Father of Darkness himself. This eerie mace is impossible to miss on the battlefield, as it seems to smolder with dark energy from a distance, but when you get close enough, it's actually revealed to, in truth, be literally devouring the light around it. If you are struck by this weapon, it can result in instant death unless you are a colossal creature, as it greedily consumes the warmth of the victim, leaving behind only withered husks. Furthermore, the wielder can unleash the full might of the Dark Mace in a pulse that causes the weapon to feast on the life of all those standing close to him, regardless if they're friend or foe. No armor can protect you against this, and it can be devastating when reaping the entire front line of elite infantry like Black Orcs or Chosen with incredible ease. When it comes to armor, the most frightening creation is known as the Mask of the Furnace. It may appear to simply be an intimidating adornment, which the Chaos Dwarfs are known for, but this brazen, demon-faced mask actually possesses an incredible amount of power. Bound within this armor is the staggering number of souls who have been ritually tortured and sacrificed in the forge fires of Mingolzar Nagrund as the mask looks on, or observes. This terrifying piece of armor absorbs the essence and agonies of those unfortunate masses. The power of those tormented souls used as fuel to magically guard the bearer. Those who attempt to combat the Mask of the Furnace's bearer will see the echoes of the torment suffered by those imprisoned within the mask reflected upon its surface. It takes a truly brave, or just frankly oblivious individual to ignore these frightening distractions while attempting to get through its incredibly potent wards. Finally, as the name might imply, the Mask of the Furnace makes the wearer virtually immune to all forms of flame and heat, no matter how intense. The last item we'll take a look at is what might be considered the most powerful relic possessed by the Chaos Dwarfs. The Demon Flask of Asak is a rather infamous creation among the Dawizar, as Asak, however you want to pronounce it, is the sorcerer prophet who crafted it, and he found a way to turn the screeching rage of imprisoned demons itself into a weapon. This iron vessel is used to contain the mightiest and most deadly of demons, gathering up their power in preparation for a single explosive moment. When the time comes, the sorcerer prophet holding this container will open it towards the enemy, unleashing the demon's rage and power as a single apocalyptic shockwave as it escapes into the ether. This eldritch scream cracks the very earth and will shatter stone with ease, causing buildings to collapse, armies to flee in panic, and constructs like chariots and war machines to explode into fragments. Battles have been won with the careful use of the Demon Flask of Ashok, though it can only be used once before needing to be carefully refilled with another powerful demon. And that's going to be it for today's episode. Thank you all so much for joining me, and I'll see you next time.